Hi guys, I'm Tinette and welcome to my channel. In these videos that will be following the next few months, we're going to be painting the flower of the month for calendar 25. This is January, so we'll be painting this Carnation Flower. So these calendars are made specifically for people to be able to paint them. It's printed on watercolor paper, and then you can fill in whatever you need to at the dates. And then I've made the January outline quite thin and light so that you can paint it or draw it. So you do not have to use watercolor paper and paint, but I'm going to. Some of the colors I'll be using is in my favorite tin with all my favorite colors. I have my big set of Winsor & Newton, which I will also be using. I like using these three paintbrushes, so it's the size 4-3-12 of the Princeton Aqua Elite. So one of the things that is very important, because you have lots of lines close to each other and lots of areas, to make sure that you can see the difference between the lines is to have softer and darker areas. So I'm going to just start preparing my paint. So I'm just going to get my super beautiful pink. We paint from light to dark. So I'm going to start at this corner. I'm wetting my paper with my water, so it can be clean or dirty water, and then I'm going to go in with my darker pink color. I'm going to start adding it in. Make sure not to have too much paint on the paintbrush, so I use one of these cloths just to dab off paint if I feel there's too much paint on the paintbrush. And then I'm going to start by going closer to the water. So you saw immediately when the paint touches the water, it kind of explodes into the water, which gives you that beautiful blend between the light and the dark color. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean my paintbrush, and I just absorb some of this water so that there is a bigger difference between the light and the dark areas. And we're going to repeat this process, but before we continue, I want to add in even darker color in this edge. So I'm going to go directly from my pigment. So you can do this once your paint is still wet. So don't do this when your paint is dry. So because my paint is wet, I can add pigment directly into this area where it is wet, and the pigment will blend into the water very nicely. So now you can clearly see there is a light, medium and dark area. So we're just going to repeat this process. One of the things that's very important is not to paint directly next to this area. If I would paint this petal, it will just all flood into each other. So I'm going to be painting this petal over here. So once again, I'm going to start with my water. And the biggest trick I learned with watercolor paint is not to take your time when painting. It is obviously within discretion, so I won't say, rush it off. But the quicker you paint, the better the outcome. So if you would paint quicker, then you will tend to get those smoother, softer blends between colors and between lighter and darker areas. Whereas if you take your time to paint, it might dry, and then you won't be able to get that smooth line. So because once again this is still wet, I can add in my dark pigment. So I'm just going to dab that in, and you can see already this is not blending the way that did. So this area is already drier than that one was. So it is very important to have your page wet enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some water. So the best thing I do is I wet my paintbrush, I dab it off on the side of the cup. I will just softly dab it on the cloth, and then I can paint next to the wet area. I'm going to go onto this petal. I've wet the area. I'm going to go in with my medium pink. I paint away from the water, and then I move closer towards the water. If you would do it the other way around, the majority of the color that you want to use is going to flood into the water, and the water won't have the softer, lighter color. And remember, that's very important. We want that lighter color. So now that I've done the medium color, I'm going to go in with the pure pigment. So this is the darker area. So I'm just going to paint that in, and then that can dry. With the next petal, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my light colors again. Now before I paint between these two, so if I want to paint this one, I have to make sure these two are dry, and the best way to do that is to lift your paper and just turn it against the light source, and you'll see if it still reflects, then it still is wet. So make sure your watercolor paint is completely dry before you start painting your next petal. So I'm going to just wet this one everywhere I want the lighter areas. I'm going to take my medium color. I'm going to start painting away from the water, working my way towards. So you see how it immediately blends into that water, how beautiful that color. I absolutely love this color. It's one of my favorite ones. And then I'm going to go in with the pure pigment again, and I'm going to work in the darker area. So my pigment is a bit dark, so I want to dilute it a bit. So I'm going to take a little bit of water and I'm just going to add it in this area, and I almost work over the pigment. So this very, very dark area, we kind of dilute it a little bit, so it's just a little bit softer. Now I'm going to do the next area. So let's see, we can do this area. It doesn't touch anything. I'm going in with my dirty pink water. I have my medium pink color. Now I tend to paint quite dark and vibrant, but not everyone always loves that. So as long as you have a light, medium, dark, even though your dark isn't as dark as mine, that's completely fine. I wouldn't necessarily suggest to go darker than I have. If you go darker with your pigments, it does tend to look a little bit cloggy, and watercolor paint is supposed to be a soft medium. So I will definitely do one of the pictures in a lighter way of painting, where everything will be just a little bit toned down, and then you can have a look at how I've painted that one. So once again, I made sure this one is dry before I started with this one. I painted my dirty water and I add in my medium color. So you can see I had too much paint on my paintbrush. So the best thing you can do is to dry your paintbrush, and you put on the tip of the paintbrush a little bit of paint, or you can dab it off on your cloth. So now when it already happened and you want to remove it, you clean your paintbrush, you dry it, and with the dry paintbrush you can lift off the paint. Okay, so you can repeat that process. You clean your paintbrush, dry it, and we just absorb some of that paint so it is not so dark. So I'm going to take my darker pigment and I'm going to add it into just that edge to get a nice beautiful edge, so I can see the difference between this petal and that petal. So you can see it really is just the same technique that is being repeated. So I'm going to add in my water here again, and it is okay if you don't follow every single curve. You can see I'm going quite quick and rough about it. And then I'm going to add in my medium color away from the water again, and then working my way closer. So in this area, these two petals looks very similar. So what I'll do is I'll take my pigment directly from the pan, and I'll just add it to that bottom line just to get that shadow in. So basically I'm painting this petal shadow that's on this petal. So if you would imagine the light coming from this way, that the tops of, or the edges of the petals are lighter, where the inside, where it's closer to the flower, is darker. So we're just going to repeat that on all of the petals. So I'm going to this one, obviously it's a bit of a bigger petal, so I'm going in with my size 4 paintbrush. I go in with my dirty pink water just to cover those edges. And the best trick I can give you is, instead of applying paint with a paintbrush, I move it with a paintbrush. So let me show you what I'm trying to explain. So I'm adding the paint to the area, but from there I'm moving it around to where I want it. So I don't every time get new paint to apply to the area. Watercolor paint goes quite a long way, so you don't need as much as you would think you need. So it is important to keep that in mind when you paint. Less is more. And then I'm going to go in with my darker color. Now obviously if you take pigment directly from the pan, it tends not to blend as easily as it would when you mix it with water. So obviously there is a little bit of water in it, but there isn't a lot. So we just want to help the color blend better, so we can always grab some water and just push it. So now I want to create, instead of a line between the light and the dark, I want to add in some vertical lines, like as if the petal has these beautiful veins, so you can see how that blends out. So we can do this next petal, and I'm going to start with my light dirty water. And the best trick I can give you with the amount of paint that you need to use, as long as you can lift your page without it running, you are good with the amount of paint. If you, the moment you see it there is too much and your paint starts running, then I would just lift that up with one of your paint brushes, preferably a clean dry paintbrush, and then just dab it on the serviette or your painting cloth. I do not like using the painting cloth itself to pick up water or paint, just because it has a little bit of a pattern. You can see all these little dots and it leaves that behind, and we don't want that. So once again with this one, I want to keep this shadow over here that this petal is casting on the petal, and the pigment isn't really moving. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some a dry paintbrush, well, it's semi-dry, so I dip it in the water, I dry it off, and I just dab one quick one, and then I'm gonna push the darker paint towards the lighter paint. So you can also do that technique, and then by having a difference between the light and dark, I'll go in with my clean water again and just paint a little bit in that area. And then once again, I'm just going to lift off some of it so it is not so dark. So now I can still see there's a difference between these two, and those two, and that's what we are aiming for. Now this petal over here is a little bit lighter, and it only has a dark, almost a line at the edge where the shadow is. So we're gonna be able to get that by adding less paint. So by moving quickly, the paint doesn't all flood at once to the page, so it gives me time to control it better. So this is one of those areas or times where painting quicker really does help your painting. Right, so now we only have a few left, so we really need to make sure that there is a difference between them, give the flower some depth. What I actually want to add into this one is a little bit of black. So I'm going to re-wet the area, and be very careful not to use too much water. If you use too much water, you might just pick up all the paint, and we don't want to do that either. So I'm going to take my little bit of black, and I really want it like a really dark black, and then I just want to add it into this edge over there and in here. So it's going to help me just to give that contrast on the painting. Because I only used one color, it tends to be a little bit dull. So it helps to just add a little bit of black, or you can even use this pink and mix it with a little bit of black. So I'm going to add a little dark petal over here to give it a little bit of vibrance to it. So I like watering it first, just so that it doesn't look so flat. So the pigment will still blend into the water area, so it is dark to a little bit lighter. And then we're going to do this one. So obviously this is part of that petal. It is like a fold. So we want to repeat the colors and the order of the colors, so that you can still see the difference, but that you can see it is the same petal. So what I want to do is I'm only going to add in a little bit of light to this corner over here and on that edge, and the rest of it is going to be quite dark, almost the same color as over there. So when I add in my darker pigment directly from the pan, once again it doesn't blend. So what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of water. Now this really needs to be a little bit of water because the area isn't really big, and then I work away and then towards, and then the moment I touch it, it blends into the water, and then I can just help it by pushing the paint to where I want it. So that is kind of what I was looking for, and I'm going to add in a tiny bit of black just in that spot over there, so we have that depth. So I'm just waiting for this to dry before I can do that one. So for now we're going to move on to this one. So this one is moving towards there, so we're going to start by painting this area and then going into this area. So I just want to wet that nicely, and then when I go in with my color, I'm going to just dab it in. So I wanted to have a little bit of a natural flow, so I kind of like how this came out. It's not too controlled. And then I just want to add in a little bit darker area, so over here where it has the top fold, and then we can just once again move some of the pigment around. And then this area over here, I want it really, really light, so I'm going to paint the water and add in the tiniest bit of paint, just so that it floods in there and we keep the light area like that. Then we can go into these last petals. So I want to do this one. It bends a little bit strange, so we need to get the color right so that it makes sense the way it's bending. So this area is lighter where this is darker, so I'm going to add in my darker color over here, and I'm going to add a little bit of the pigment and a tiny bit of the black, just so we can get that really dark edge. So it's hard to see the difference between these two, but the moment it gets there you can see it is two separate parts, so that is great. And then I'm going to do this one once again with the water. We're going to add in some of the color. I just want to add in this darker area, so this is also quite a dark area, so I'm just going to make it this one color, the darker color, and then a little bit of black to really get in that shadow. And then this last petal kind of moves like this, so we're going to start by just adding in the lighter areas at the edge. And then you'll see now my color is finished, but luckily this is the last petal, so we are good. Also, the other thing, if the paint does finish before you are done, that's also fine. Like, I've done many paintings where the one area is a different color from the other. It's not like blue and green, it's just a different variant of that same color, so it's very close, but it's not 100%, and I almost like it because then it doesn't make your painting look boring. So now I'm going to do my greens, and I'm a very big fan of green, so I have these beautiful colors from Daniel Smith. I will link them below which ones they are. So I'm going to start in with my lighter green, or this is my medium green, so I just want to block that in, and then I quickly want to use some yellow. So this plant is, or this flower is a newer bloom, so it hasn't had time to age yet, so they still has a little bit of yellow in the greens. So I'm going to just add in the yellow line, and then once again with the shadows, it's very important to get those shadows. So with my darker green, I'm going to add in a few shadows underneath these petals, so that you can clearly see that the petal is more to the front than the stem of the flower. And I'm just going to pull these lines down a bit so it's not so perfect. And then we're going to just do the same with this petal. So I want to just wet it first so that everything blends into each other nicely. I'm going to grab some yellow, so I'm going to make this one a little bit more yellow than the rest, so we can add a nice bit of yellow to it. And for this one, I really didn't mix my colors. I'm just using it direct from my pan, because I really just absolutely love these two colors, or these three colors, and how they paint. It really just gives you such a big variety of tones in just the one color. So it is ideal to wait for it to dry, so I am going to just continue painting. It's going to flood, as you see, and then I'm just going to pull that down so we have our light and our dark area. And then I'm going to paint this last bit. So I'm first going to do the two sides, and I'm going to do that simultaneously, so you can see that they kind of look the same, but it's not the same, exactly the same. So I'm starting with my yellow. So we have our yellow areas, and then I have my light green. And make sure, because this paint is very, very pigmented, not to take too much paint at a time. So take your time, take less paint, and rather add to it than the pigment flooding into your artwork and you can't go back. The gold that I made myself, you can order it online if you also like this beautiful gold color. I just poured it in today, so usually it is dry, but I'm just going to use it wet for now. And then I want to paint this word January with my gold. With this, it is better to paint quicker. But if you find that it is difficult to paint between these lines, rather take your time and use a smaller paintbrush than to mess this up. After you have this beautiful flower, now you mess up the word January. And then the other thing I also suggest is my pinky touches the paper at all times. I don't lift up and I don't paint up in the air. This way I'm painting, I have more control, and it is just easier to paint and control the paint bristles. I also don't hold it there. I tend to hold it on the silver part, so it is the closer to the paint bristles, the more control I have. So these should be dry, so I'm going to just go in there with my yellow, my medium green, and you see how beautifully they blend in together. I just love this green, it's such a beautiful color. And then I'm going to go in with a tiny bit of the dark so that you can see that this is a little bit of a shadow. So this area has a shadow on this area. And then I just want to add in a few darker areas like that so we can clearly see the difference between everything. So I just want to finish this January. Also, it's better to take less paint on your paintbrush so you can clearly see I'm not filling my paintbrush, but there's only a little bit of gold on the tip of the paintbrush, so it's very important to get that right. If you have too much paint on the paintbrush, then the paint tends to flood to the paper and you can't control that. And then especially with this gold or any metallic color, you want to use it quite concentrated so that the pigment is very strong, so that you can really see that reflection. So this is the final product, and when I turn the page in the light, you can see how the word with the gold reflects. So this is January, and we'll be painting February next. Thank you guys for watching. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to my channel.